The hum of the vehicle's engine was a low thrum against my weary bones, a counterpoint to the relentless ringing in my ears that wasn't quite tinnitus, but the phantom echo of too many sirens. Another call, another body. Just what I needed after spending the last 72 hours navigating the grim logistics of a morgue at capacity after mass casualty event. The air in there had been thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sterile bite of disinfectant, a scent that clung to my clothes, my skin, my very soul, no matter how many times I showered. I'd seen enough death to last a lifetime or 10, but the calls kept coming. They always did. This one, though, was different. Elias Thorne, the detective had said over the phone, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and exasperation. The tech mogul. He was found in his fortress, as he called it, apparent overdose. But, well, you'll see. The detective's hesitancy was enough to pique my interest, a flicker in the dull ember of my professional detachment. Elias Thorne was a name whispered in hushed tones in certain circles, a ghost in the machine who'd built an empire on algorithms and then vanished into his own digital shadow. The address led me far from the city's grimy pulse, up a winding road that snaked through manicured hills. The property itself was a statement, a minimalist structure of glass and polished steel, nestled into the landscape like a predatory bird. No visible fences, no gates, just an invisible perimeter that I knew, from the detective's earlier briefing, was bristling with 1,000 unseen eyes and a dozen layers of digital locks. Impenetrable, they'd called it. A smart home so advanced, it practically breathed. A patrol vehicle, lights dark, sat discreetly near the entrance. The detective, a man whose permanent frown lines seemed etched by years of dealing with the absurdities of the human condition, was waiting for me. He nodded a weary greeting. "Omar, thanks for coming. I know you've been swamped." "It's fine," I lied, pulling on my gloves, the familiar latex stretching over my fingers a comforting ritual. "What have we got?" "Elias Thorne, recluse, billionaire, genius, they say. He was found him in his study this morning. His personal assistant couldn't get a hold of him, eventually triggered an emergency protocol that alerted us. Took us an hour to get the system to even open the main door. Kid had more security than a national bank." He gestured towards the gleaming edifice. Inside, everything was locked down tight, no forced entry anywhere, all sensors undisturbed. Looks like he just checked out. "Overdose?" I asked, my gaze sweeping the exterior for any anomaly, any misplaced pebble, any hint of a disturbance. There was nothing. The place was pristine. "That's the initial assessment," the detective confirmed, leading me towards the entrance. Pills scattered, a half-empty glass of amber liquid next to him. Classic. The assistant says Thorne had a history of depression, though he was never formally diagnosed. He was a private man. I followed the detective through a series of automated doors that hissed open and closed with a silent efficiency. The interior was stark, almost surgical. White walls, recessed lighting, and not a single personal touch in the long corridors we traversed. Every surface gleamed. It felt less like a home and more like a high-tech vault. We reached a large, open-plan space that I assumed was the study. And there he was, Elias Thorne. He lay sprawled on a plush, charcoal rug amidst a scattering of small, white pills. A half-empty tumbler sat precariously on the edge of a low, obsidian coffee table. The air was cool, sterile, devoid of any human scent beyond the faint, almost imperceptible odor of stale alcohol and something vaguely medicinal. The assistant found him like this. The detective reiterated, his voice lowered now, almost reverent. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing out of place except for, well, Thorne himself. My eyes, trained for years to pick apart the narratives bodies tell, began their work. Elias Thorne was a man in his late 40s, gaunt, with a sharp, intelligent face now slackened by death. He wore expensive loungewear, a cashmere sweater and dark trousers, impeccable even in death. His left arm was flung out, hand open, palm up, just inches from the scattered pills. His right arm was bent at the elbow, hand resting on his chest. His head was tilted to the side, eyes open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Cause of death appears to be an overdose of sedatives, the detective continued, pointing vaguely at the pills. Preliminary identification points to a powerful benzodiazepine. Looks like he crushed them, mixed them with something strong. Whiskey, maybe. Fast-acting. I knelt, my knees protesting slightly from the long hours spent hunched over slabs. I didn't touch anything yet, just observed. The pills were indeed white, small and numerous, some whole, some crushed into a fine powder. They were scattered in a semicircular pattern, as if dropped from a height or flung with a casual gesture. Interesting, I murmured, more to myself than to the detective. What is? He asked, stepping closer, his brow furrowed deeper. The scattering pattern, I said, my gaze fixed on the tiny white fragments. If he was crushing them to consume, why would they be so widely dispersed? And why are some still whole? My internal monologue was already running, questioning. A man intent on suicide by overdose, especially one with Thorne's presumed intellect, would likely be more efficient, more deliberate. Crushing them, yes, but then collecting the powder, mixing it thoroughly. This looked theatrical. I shifted my focus to Thorne's hand. The left one flung open, palm up. The fingers were slightly curled, not splayed flat. And on the pad of his index finger, a faint, almost invisible smudge. Not blood, not dirt, something else. Something metallic, perhaps. Then I noticed the position of his right hand, resting on his chest. It looked natural enough, but the thumb was tucked in, almost clenched, and the knuckles were slightly abraded, as if he'd scraped them against something rough. But everything in this room, from the rug to the coffee table, was smooth, polished, pristine. I leaned in closer to his face. His eyes, still open, held a peculiar expression. Not the vacant stare of a man succumbing to a drug. There was a subtle tension around the brows, a slight furrow, almost like a question, and his lips, parted just so, not relaxed, taut. And the glass, I said, my voice low. I pointed to the tumbler on the coffee table. Why? Then why is the glass on his left side, just out of reach of his right hand? And why does it look like he just barely missed knocking it over? The glass was close to the edge, but not teetering. It was placed there. Awkwardly, the detective's initial assessment of suicide by overdose, while plausible on the surface, felt too neat, too perfectly arranged, like a tableau. I moved to the back of Thorne's head, noting the angle. His neck was twisted slightly, more than one would expect from a simple slump. And just beneath his ear, a barely perceptible mark, a faint discoloration the size of a pinhead. It wasn't a bruise. My voice was calm, but inside, a familiar determination, a predatory focus, was stirring. The exhaustion from the morgue, the weariness of the past few days, began to recede, replaced by the sharp clarity of an emerging puzzle. The detective stared at me, his frown deepening. Omar, everything points to it. Locked room, no entry, pills, depression, the works. Everything points to it too perfectly, I countered, rising to my feet. The way the pills are scattered, the position of the body, the subtle tension in his face, the abraded knuckles, the mark on his neck, and this glass. It's a prop. Someone wants this to look like a suicide, but they weren't as meticulous as they thought they were. I looked around the technologically advanced study, its gleaming surfaces reflecting my own intense gaze. This wasn't just a simple overdose. This was a meticulously planned performance, staged within an impenetrable fortress. And the director of this grim play was still out there, hiding behind the very technology Elias Thorne had created. My work had just begun. The air in the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event was a thick metallic cloak, heavy with the scent of disinfectant and something indefinable, something of finality. Fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow on everything. Every gurney was occupied, every available surface piled with evidence bags, each telling a silent, tragic story. I felt the collective weight of it all as I navigated the narrow aisles, my resolve firm despite the grim surroundings. Thorne, Elias, I stated, my voice cutting through the low murmur of activity. A colleague, already swamped, gestured vaguely towards a stainless steel table in a far corner, barely visible amidst the chaos. He's ready, Omar. Just waiting for your official stamp on the overdose. Save us some time. I nodded, a tight, non-committal gesture. Save us some time. That was the prevailing attitude. A rich recluse found dead in his impenetrable smart home, an empty pill bottle nearby, suicide by overdose, case closed. But I had seen the scene, felt the prickle of unease that no amount of technological sophistication could mask. Elias Thorne's death was no open and shut case, not for me. The body of Elias Thorne lay before me, almost pristine, a stark contrast to the urgency and disarray around us. His expensive silk pajamas were cut away, revealing a lean, almost ascetic physique. On the surface, he looked peaceful, as if merely asleep. Too peaceful, perhaps. I began my external examination, methodically, slowly, ignoring the impatient glances from the other side of the room. My gloved fingers traced the contours of his skin, searching for anything, a whisper of a story that the initial assessment had overlooked. His fingernails were clean, perfectly manicured, yet I took samples, scraping meticulously beneath each one. You never knew what microscopic secrets might cling there. I leaned closer, adjusting the overhead lamp. My gaze lingered on his eyes. They were wide, unfocused, but what caught my attention were the almost imperceptible pinprick hemorrhages across the conjunctiva, the whites of his eyes. Petechiae. Tiny, red darts, often indicative of asphyxia or some form of sustained pressure. But for an overdose, it was unusual. Not impossible, certainly, but it didn't quite fit the neat narrative. My brow furrowed. Wait, that doesn't add up. If this was a simple ingestion, why these telltale signs of struggle, or at least distress beyond the drug's immediate effect? I moved down to his neck. His skin was smooth, unblemished. I ran my fingers along his jawline, then lower, beneath where the collar of his pajamas would have rested. And there it was. Not a bruise, not a clear ligature mark, but a faint, almost ghost-like discoloration. A subtle line of reddish purple, barely a millimeter wide, fading quickly into the surrounding skin. It was the kind of mark that would be completely missed by a less experienced eye or by someone not looking specifically for it. It was too faint to be from a struggle against a robust assailant, but it suggested something had been there, applying light, consistent pressure. A thin wire, a cord. It was inconsistent with an overdose, where the victim typically drifts into unconsciousness. This suggested a moment of acute external pressure. My internal alarm bells, already ringing softly, now began to clang. I took precise measurements, capturing the anomaly with a specialized camera, ensuring every detail was documented. Then came the internal examination. The first incision, a clean Y-shape, opened him up. The layers of tissue, muscle, and bone yielded to my practiced hands. I worked through the thoracic cavity, examining the lungs. They were not as congested as I would expect from a typical opioid overdose, where pulmonary edema is a common finding. There was some fluid, yes, but not the heavy, waterlogged appearance that often accompanies such deaths. Another subtle discrepancy. I moved to the stomach. This was where the answers to an overdose lay. I carefully clamped and removed the organ, emptying its contents into a sterile container. There was indeed a residue, a fine, powdery substance, consistent with the opiate found in the pill bottle at the scene. But the volume was surprisingly low, and its distribution seemed odd. It wasn't the uniform dissolution I'd expect from a swallowed pill, nor the concentrated mass of an injection. It was almost as if it had been introduced, after some initial process, or in a highly refined, rapidly absorbed form that left little behind. And the stomach lining itself, usually irritated by the ingestion of such a substance, showed remarkably little inflammation. It was too clean. I paused, my gloved hand resting on the edge of the dissecting table. The noise of the busy morgue faded to a distant hum. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing the scene in Thorne's study again. The perfect order, the security, the empty pill bottle. And now, the body. The petechiae, the faint neck mark, the surprisingly clean stomach with its peculiar residue, the less congested lungs. Each anomaly on its own could be dismissed, perhaps attributed to an unusual physiological response or an oversight. But together, they wove a tapestry of inconsistency. They spoke of a story that didn't quite align with the one written by the police. Omar, anything conclusive yet? The lead detective, a harried woman with tired eyes, appeared in the doorway of my corner, his voice edged with impatience. She looked like she wanted nothing more than to clear this case and move on to the next casualty. I turned, meeting her gaze. Conclusive. Yes, in a way, I said, my voice carefully even, betraying none of the growing certainty within me. It's not what it seems, not a simple overdose. There are irregularities. She sighed, a heavy sound. Irregularities. Omar, the scene was locked down. No forced entry, no sign of struggle. An empty pill bottle right next to him. What exactly are you suggesting? I wiped my hands on a fresh towel, my eyes still fixed on the body of Elias Thorne. I'm suggesting, detective, that someone went to great lengths to make it look like a simple overdose. The details are too neat, too carefully arranged. And what I'm finding here, the body is telling a different story. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. This wasn't a suicide. This was a meticulously planned murder. Her eyes narrowed, skepticism battling with a flicker of professional curiosity. I knew I had an uphill battle. The initial police assessment was a powerful current, and I was swimming against it. But the evidence, however subtle, was there, and I was determined to find every last piece. The director of this grim play might have thought they were brilliant, but they hadn't accounted for my meticulousness. Or perhaps they understood it all too well, and believed they had outsmarted even the science itself. Her eyes had narrowed, all right. I could practically feel the skepticism radiating off the chief investigator, a palpable wall I was up against. The initial police assessment, suicide by overdose, was a powerful current, and I was swimming against it, every stroke demanding more effort. My first call, after leaving Thorne's smart home, was to the only cyber forensics expert I trusted, someone known for their ability to untangle digital spaghetti. Not that I had much pull, especially with the current situation. The city was still reeling, and resources were stretched thin. My usual lab was operating at a fraction of its capacity, and the entire facility, the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event, was a chaotic testament to just how overwhelmed everyone was. Getting priority for a single, seemingly straightforward death was like asking for a private jet during a citywide evacuation. Still, I managed to corner the cyber forensics expert in a makeshift office set up in a repurposed underground bunker, a place buzzing with the low hum of servers and the clatter of keyboards. The expert, young individual whose glasses perpetually slid down their nose, looked up from a tangle of wires with a sigh that could deflate a hot air balloon. "Omar," they replied, pushing their glasses up with a thumb. "I'm buried. We're talking about 100 terabytes of compromised data from the city's infrastructure. What do I need?" "Elias Thorne's smart home logs," I stated, leaning against a rack of blinking machines. "Everything. Security footage, environmental controls, network traffic, access logs, even the smart fridge inventory. I need to know if anyone or anything got in or out, or if anything was unusual." Their eyebrows shot up. "Thorne, the tech hermit, I heard that was a clean suicide, overdose." "Initial assessment," I countered, keeping my voice level. "I have reasons to believe otherwise. Call it a gut feeling backed by a few inconvenient facts." The expert hesitated, their gaze flicking to a wall of monitors displaying scrolling code. "Omar, even if I wanted to, Thorne's system is legendary. It's not just encrypted, it's practically sentient. He built it to be unbreachable, took pride in it." "Exactly," I answered, a faint smile touching my lips. "Which means if it was breached, or if something happened within it that shouldn't have, it would be a monumental event. And it would leave a trace. He was meticulous. He wouldn't leave a door open, not even a digital one." After a tense negotiation that involved me promising to personally review their backlog of conventional forensic data once the crisis abated, the expert reluctantly agreed. They assigned a junior analyst to the task, under their direct supervision, and within hours, we had a temporary workstation set up, piping Thorne's fortress of data into our improvised bunker. The first few passes were tedious. We sifted through days of security footage, frame by painstaking frame. Thorne was a creature of habit, moving from his study to his kitchen, occasionally to his gym. His reclusive lifestyle meant there were no visitors, no delivery drivers past the outer gate, no unexpected faces. The system reported no external breaches, no unauthorized login attempts, no unusual network activity. Everything screamed routine. "See," the junior analyst muttered, stifling a yawn. clean as a whistle. He just went to bed and didn't wake up. I ignored them, my eyes glued to the screen, watching the digital timestamp tick past the estimated time of death. The house was a ghost in the machine, lights dimming and brightening on schedule, temperature regulating, air purifiers humming. It was a digital heartbeat, perfectly regular. Too regular, perhaps. Go back, I instructed, pointing to a specific time, about 2 hours before the estimated time of death. Show me the environmental controls for his bedroom, temperature, humidity, air quality sensors. The analyst navigated the interface. The data scrolled. Temperature stable at 21 degrees C, humidity at 50%, air quality pristine. Now, I responded, leaning closer, show me the same parameters for the master bathroom immediately adjacent to the bedroom. A new set of graphs appeared. The bathroom showed a slight, almost imperceptible spike in humidity around that time, then a rapid return to baseline. The temperature also dipped a fraction of a degree. He took a shower, the analyst surmised, shrugging. Standard, the system corrects for it. And the air quality, I inquired. No change, they replied, scrolling down. Still optimal. I felt a prickle of unease. That doesn't add up, I murmured, more to myself than to them. A shower, especially a hot one, creates steam. Even with a powerful ventilation system, there should be a temporary, however slight, drop in air quality readings, or at least a brief spike in a compound like carbon from the hot water heater, or even just the sudden influx of water vapor. His system is hypersensitive. It monitors everything down to particulate matter. The analyst frowned, rechecking the logs. It's not registering anything out of the ordinary, Omar. It just shows optimal throughout that period, despite the humidity spike. My mind raced. Thorne's system was designed to be perfect, to reflect reality with extreme precision. If it was reporting optimal air quality during a period when there should have been a detectable fluctuation, even a minor one, that meant one of two things. Either the sensors were faulty or the system was being told to ignore or override those readings. And Thorne, the meticulous tech mogul, wouldn't tolerate faulty sensors in his unbreachable home. Pull up the sensor diagnostics for the master bathroom, specifically the air quality unit, I commanded, and cross-reference it with the system's override logs. I want to see if there were any manual or automated adjustments to the reporting parameters for that specific sensor around that time. The analyst typed furiously, a new window popping up. Lines of code scrolled by, then a single entry highlighted in red, reveal/discovery. There it was. A log entry, timestamped precisely during the shower activity. Air quality sensor bath master unit 01, reporting threshold adjusted to optimal baseline for duration of activity. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a command, a digital instruction to filter out any readings that deviated from optimal during a specific event. It meant that something was detected, but the system was programmed to pretend it wasn't. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a simple suicide. This was a meticulously crafted deception. Someone or something had manipulated Thorne's unbreachable system, not to break in, but to mask something happening inside. The system hadn't been breached, it had been reprogrammed, and the thought made me doubt my earlier conviction about the method of entry. If the system was manipulated from within, how or by whom? The digital footprint was there, clear as day, but it led to a ghost. The tension in the cramped bunker office thickened, a silent acknowledgement that we had just peeled back the first layer of a very sophisticated lie. The red text on the screen burned a hole in my resolve. Air quality sensor bath master unit 01, reporting threshold adjusted to optimal BAS. It was too precise, too deliberate. An automated system doesn't just decide to adjust its reporting threshold to optimal baseline. At the exact moment, a man is likely dying in a sealed room. No, that smacked of manual override, a pre-programmed command, or something far more sinister than a glitch. The analyst, a young man whose eyes usually held a casual disinterest, now looked at me with a flicker of unease. He knew what I knew. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a setting. I traced the origin of that command. I questioned, my voice low. He shook his head, already typing. The system's designed for local control, Omar. Thorne was a stickler for privacy. Unless he logged it himself or someone physically accessed the console, it'll be tough. It just shows system initiated. System initiated, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Convenient. My gut clenched. The initial assessment of suicide by overdose felt flimsy enough, a neat bow tied around a complex package. Now with this, the bow was unraveling. Elias Thorne, the tech recluse, hadn't just stumbled into his death. Someone had meticulously prepared the stage. The next few days were a blur of frustration and mounting tension. The lead detective, a pragmatic man with an almost palpable disdain for anything that complicated a clean case, kept pushing the suicide narrative. He had his own leads, his own theories, all pointing to conventional motives. "We've got two strong contenders, Omar," he'd said, leaning back in his chair, his voice radiating a certainty I couldn't share. "The former business partner, right? A nasty split a few years back, millions lost, public accusations of intellectual property theft. The partner threatened Thorne publicly more than once. And then there's the rival CEO. Thorne was reportedly on the verge of launching something big, something that could disrupt their entire market. Motive, opportunity, history, it's all there." He laid out the police file on his desk, photos of a grim-faced man and a woman in a power suit. They both had reasons to want Thorne out of the picture. The partner for revenge, the CEO for profit. It's a classic corporate takedown, maybe with a personal vendetta mixed in. I listened, nodding occasionally, but my mind kept returning to that sensor log. A disgruntled partner might send a nasty email or even hire a hitman, but would they adjust an air quality sensor's reporting threshold in Thorne's hyper-secure home? It felt too specific, too technical, too subtle for a brute force corporate rivalry. It suggested a killer who understood not just Thorne's business, but the very architecture of his life, down to the smart home's operating parameters. My own work was a grind. The preliminary autopsy report confirmed the overdose, no struggle, no defensive wounds. But the more I looked, the more I felt like I was staring at a perfectly constructed illusion. The way the drugs were administered, the lack of any struggle, the precise timing. It was all too perfect for a man spiraling into self-destruction. And then there was the question of how the killer got in and out without leaving a trace, without triggering a single alarm. Thorne's home was a fortress, not just against intruders, but against scrutiny. I found myself back at the facility, navigating the crowded corridors of the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event. The air hung heavy with the sterile scent of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and Sama. Every bay was occupied, covered forms lining the walls, a testament to the city's recent tragedy. My workspace felt smaller, more cramped. The hum of the ventilation system, a constant drone against the backdrop of hushed voices, and the occasional clang of metal. It was hard to focus, the sheer volume of cases demanding attention, but Thorne's case gnawed at me. It was a puzzle that refused to fit the picture the police were painting. I pulled up Thorne's preliminary toxicology report again. The cocktail of sedatives and analgesics was potent, designed to induce a peaceful, irreversible sleep. No struggle, no fight, just surrender. But if it was suicide, why the sensor adjustment? Why the meticulous staging? I stared at the medical examiner's notes, my own observations from the scene. The subtle displacement of a rug, the almost imperceptible scratch on a doorframe that the police forensics team had dismissed as old wear and tear. Small things, easily overlooked, but to my eye, they were whispers of something more. I decided to pivot. If the conventional motives didn't quite fit the forensic evidence, then maybe I was looking at the wrong kind of motive. Thorne wasn't just a tech mogul. He was an innovator, a disruptor. What if his death wasn't about old grudges or market share, but about something he was about to do? I reached out to a former colleague, a data forensics specialist who sometimes consulted for Thorne's company. I knew he wouldn't break client confidentiality outright, but he might offer a hint, a direction. Omar, the colleague's voice was tight over the secure line. He was working on something big, even for Thorne, very hush-hush, code-named Chrysalis. They were compartmentalizing everything, even internally. I only got glimpses, but it sounded ambitious, potentially world-changing. World-changing how? I pressed, my pen hovering over a fresh notepad. Beyond smart homes, beyond AI, think deep integration, not just with my environment, but with you. Biofeedback, neural interfaces, environmental sculpting. The rumors were it could revolutionize everything from healthcare to defense. But also, he paused, and I heard a quick sigh. It had some serious ethical red flags. Privacy concerns, control issues. Thorne wasn't one to shy away from controversy. Ethical red flags, I murmured. That was it. That felt right. A project so sensitive, so potentially disruptive, that it transcended mere corporate rivalry. This wasn't about who owned a patent, it was about who controlled the future. I hung up, the implications washing over me. Chrysalis, a project that could connect directly with a person, perhaps even influence them. Could someone have used Thorne's own technology against him? The air quality sensor adjustment suddenly took on a chilling new dimension. If someone could subtly manipulate Thorne's environment, what else could they manipulate? His perception, his will. I was no longer looking for a simple murderer. I was looking for someone who understood the very fabric of Thorne's cutting-edge world, someone who could turn his greatest innovations into weapons. The tension in the morgue at Capacity after mass casualty event felt less about the recent tragedy and more about the invisible, insidious threat I was starting to uncover. This killer wasn't just smart. They were operating on a different plane entirely, and I had a feeling they were just getting started. The chill from the facility's overworked ventilation system did little to cut through the oppressive heat of my frustration. Chrysalis. The word felt like a burr under my skin, itching at the edges of my understanding. A project, a secret, something significant enough to motivate murder, not just corporate theft. I scrubbed a hand over my tired face, the scent of antiseptic, and something deeper, more metallic, clinging to the air. The place was a symphony of controlled chaos. Every available examination table was occupied, every freezer unit humming a desperate tune, strained beyond its intended capacity. The usual quiet hum of specialized equipment was drowned out by the constant low thrum of emergency generators, the hushed, urgent voices of colleagues, and the incessant rolling of gurneys down the narrow corridors. I was working elbow to elbow with others, our spaces delineated by rolls of plastic sheeting and the unspoken understanding of grave necessity. This wasn't my usual environment. This was a morgue at Capacity after mass casualty event, a grim testament to a day I wished I could erase. It was a pressure cooker, but the pressure only sharpened my focus on Thorne. I had Thorne's preliminary autopsy report splayed across my small, makeshift workstation, a stainless steel cart pushed against a wall. The initial assessment screamed suicide by overdose of common benzodiazepine, a dose well within lethal range, no signs of struggle, a reclusive tech mogul. The narrative was neat, almost too neat. I'd walked through that smart home, felt the silence, seen the seamless integration of technology into every aspect of Thorne's life, and it bothered me. I picked up the toxicology report again, my finger tracing the line, detailing the specific compound. Benzodiazepines, common, easily accessible, but Thorne, from what little I knew, was meticulous. A man who designed impregnable homes didn't strike me as someone who'd leave a sloppy suicide note or choose a common, garden-variety exit method. There was a lack of imagination to it that felt fundamentally at odds with the brilliance of the man. My gaze drifted to the digital forensic summary, a printout provided by the detective, detailing the smart home's logs. Temperature readings, light cycles, door sensors, air quality monitors. All seemed normal. No forced entry, no unusual activity. The house had been a sealed tomb, just as advertised, but a tomb where the occupant hadn't simply died, but had been made to die. I recalled the subtle discoloration on Thorne's fingertips, the faint, almost imperceptible mottling I'd noted during the external examination. It hadn't fit neatly into the overdose narrative. I'd attributed it to post-mortem changes exacerbated by the internal climate control of the house, perhaps. Now, a nagging whisper in my mind suggested otherwise. What if it wasn't an exacerbation, but an effect? I pulled up the high-resolution images of Thorne's hands on my tablet, zooming in, then zooming further until the pixels blurred. There at the base of his nail beds, a faint, almost cyanotic tinge. Not enough to be conclusive of anything in isolation, but coupled with the absence of struggle, the too perfect overdose. My mind began to race, connecting disparate threads. What if the killer hadn't just administered the drug? What if they had engineered the environment to accelerate its effects, to obscure the timeline, to mimic natural physiological responses? Thorne's smart home was a closed system, a laboratory. A killer who understood that system could turn it into a weapon. Consider the drug, a benzodiazepine. It causes respiratory depression. What if the smart home's environmental controls had been subtly manipulated? A gradual reduction in oxygen levels, perhaps, just enough to amplify the drug's effects without triggering alarms or causing obvious signs of asphyxiation. Or a slight increase in ambient temperature, accelerating the drug's absorption and metabolism, pushing the body faster towards collapse. It would leave no direct evidence of tampering, only an amplified outcome. The house itself would be an accomplice. This wasn't just about administering a poison. This was about optimizing the poison's effect, making it look like a standard overdose, a tragic, self-inflicted end. The killer wasn't just clever. They were a ghost in the machine, manipulating variables I hadn't even considered as weapons. The killer wasn't simply trying to hide their tracks. They were actively trying to mislead me, using the very science I practiced against me. They understood toxicology, they understood forensics, and they understood how Thorne's body would react in that meticulously controlled environment. They had crafted a narrative that my initial examination would confirm, that my colleagues would accept. I felt a surge of professional indignation, quickly followed by a prickle of self-doubt. Had I been too quick to dismiss those faint marks, too eager to fit the death into the suicide box, even for a moment? No. My gut had screamed foul play from the start, and now I knew why. The suicide was a performance, a meticulously staged final act. This wasn't just about corporate espionage anymore. This was about a killer who reveled in their intelligence, who left a signature so subtle, so interwoven with the victim's own life and home that it was almost invisible. A signature of scientific precision. My eyes swept back to the preliminary report, then to the images of Thorne's placid face. The peace looked too profound now, too undisturbed. It wasn't the peace of a man who'd chosen his end, but of a man whose end had been chosen for him with cruel, scientific efficiency. And they were daring me to prove it. The thought, instead of daunting me, solidified my resolve. I would tear apart their perfect crime, piece by painstaking piece, until the truth, however ugly, lay exposed. The air in my lab was thick with the metallic tang of disinfectant and something else, a faint, persistent ghost of despair that clung to the walls, a byproduct of the relentless pace. Every surface was cluttered. Trays of samples vying for space with half-empty coffee mugs. I worked under the harsh glare of the overhead fluorescence, the hum of the ventilation system, a monotonous drone against the frantic whispers of my own thoughts. The weight of the Elias Thorne case pressed down on me, a heavy shroud. I'd spent days on the initial samples from Thorne's body and his smart home, chasing shadows. The initial assessment, that neat package of suicide by overdose, felt like a deliberate insult to my intelligence. Thorne was too careful, too meticulous to leave such a gaping hole in his security. My gut screamed it was murder, but the evidence, or lack thereof, was infuriatingly silent. The drug was present, yes, and in lethal quantities, but something about the physiological response, the way his systems shut down, felt expedited, as if the environment itself had been an accomplice. The detective, a pragmatic woman with eyes that missed nothing, had called again, her voice tight with the expectation of results. She needed something concrete, something that wasn't just my professional intuition. And I had nothing, yet. The pressure wasn't just from the outside. Inside this building, the atmosphere was strained. We were operating under extreme conditions, a grim reality that had turned our meticulous workspace into a controlled chaos. The entire facility was a bottleneck. The morgue at capacity after mass casualty event had pushed every department to its absolute limit. I pushed away the fatigue, focusing on the microscopic. If the killer had been so clever as to engineer the environment to mimic natural responses, then the clues wouldn't be macroscopic. They'd be hidden in plain sight, invisible to the naked eye, requiring a deeper dive than anyone else would bother with. I had a hunch, a sliver of an idea, that the killer wasn't just smart. They were scientific. They understood the very mechanisms I dedicated my life to dissecting. I went back to the primary samples, the ones from Thorne's airways, his skin, the very fibers of his clothing. I set up the scanning electron microscope, a beast of a machine that could show me worlds within worlds. My fingers, steady despite the tremor of exhaustion, adjusted the focus, the magnification. Hours bled into one another. My eyes ached, tracing the intricate patterns of dust, skin cells, textile fibers. Most of it was mundane, predictable. House dust, carton from his expensive shirts, a few stray pet hairs, all accounted for. Then a flicker, a glint of something utterly out of place. It was impassably small, a filament barely visible even at thousands of times magnification. It wasn't organic. It certainly wasn't carton or polyester. It was a synthetic, unlike any fiber I'd encountered in typical clothing or household materials. Its structure was perfectly uniform, almost crystalline, reflecting light with an odd, iridescent sheen. It was thin, almost transparent, yet incredibly strong-looking under the electron beam. I spent another hour just isolating it, carefully manipulating microscopic tools to extract the single-minute strand from the surrounding debris. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a fiber, it was a designed fiber. Its surface was dotted with what looked like minute, almost fractal-like patterns, too intricate to be accidental. And it seemed to have a faint, almost imperceptible charge, causing it to adhere to the sample slide with unusual tenacity. My mind raced. What was this? Where could it have come from? It wasn't just foreign. It was alien to the domestic environment of Thorne's smart home. I ran a quick elemental analysis, something rudimentary, just to get a baseline. The results were perplexing. It was composed of a complex polymer, yes, but with trace elements I couldn't immediately identify, elements not commonly found in commercial textiles or even specialized industrial materials. There was a unique signature in its atomic structure, a kind of internal lattice that spoke of incredibly precise engineering. This wasn't from a carpet. It wasn't from a blanket. It wasn't from a worker's uniform or a cleaning cloth. This was something else entirely. The killer had engineered the environment. What if this fiber was part of that engineering? What if it was a component of a device, something so small and sophisticated that it would leave virtually no trace? A dispersal mechanism for the drug, perhaps, or a sensor designed to interact with Thorne's highly advanced home system. I remembered the smart home's intricate air filtration, the almost sterile environment Thorne maintained. For something like this to be present, it had to have been introduced purposefully and recently, and it had to be from a source that could bypass or operate within such a controlled ecosystem without detection. This fiber didn't just point away from the initial suicide theory. It blew a hole through it. It didn't belong to Thorne or his staff or anything mundane. This was a signature, a technological fingerprint left by someone operating at the very edge of innovation. Wait, I muttered to myself, leaning closer to the screen, the shimmering filament dominating my view. That doesn't add up. If this was a component, a piece of highly specialized equipment, it wasn't just a random contaminant. It spoke of access of resources, of a level of sophistication that went far beyond mere corporate espionage. My initial suspects, the disgruntled business partners, the rivals, suddenly seemed too analog. This fiber suggested a different kind of player altogether. Someone with access to advanced, perhaps even experimental, materials and technologies. Someone who understood the minutiae, the invisible. I had found it. The needle in the haystack, the impossible trace. But what it revealed was a much larger, more unsettling truth. The killer wasn't just a mastermind. They were an innovator, leaving behind a clue so subtle, so profoundly advanced, it could only be recognized by someone looking for the impossible. And I had a feeling this wasn't just a fiber. It was a fragment of a very dangerous, very cutting-edge secret. The game had just changed. The harsh fluorescent lights of my lab hummed, a constant, irritating drone that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. The air, already thick with the metallic tang of disinfectant, and that faint, persistent ghost of despair, seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Every surface was cluttered, trays of samples vying for space with half-empty coffee mugs, testament to the relentless pace. I worked under the harsh glare, my eyes burning, tracing the subtle, almost imperceptible patterns on the epidermal cells I'd scraped from Elias Thorne's fingertips. The official report, signed off by the lead investigator, still sat on my desk, a clean, sterile document stating suicide by overdose, but the story it told felt like a cheap paperback novel, all surface and no depth. My own findings whispered a different narrative, one of meticulous deception, of a mind calculating enough to craft a death that looked like an end, but was, in fact, a beginning. The unusual residue on Thorne's cuticles, the specific type of synthetic fiber found under his fingernails, none of it screamed self-inflicted. A sharp knock on the frosted glass of my lab door startled me. I looked up, blinking against the light. It was the director's assistant, a young man who always looked perpetually stressed. "Omar, the director wants to see I now." His voice was low, almost apologetic. I sighed, pulling off my gloves. The director rarely called me in unless it was about budget cuts or a particularly messy press situation. Neither boded well. I glanced at the half-analyzed slides, a knot tightening in my stomach. This felt different. The director's office was a stark contrast to my cluttered lab. Clean lines, polished dark wood, and a single panoramic window overlooking the city, perpetually shrouded in a grey haze. He sat behind his imposing desk, hands clasped, his gaze steady and unsettling. "Omar, take a seat." His voice was calm, too calm. I sat, the worn leather chair creaking under my weight. "Sir." He leaned forward slightly. "I've been reviewing the Thorne case, a rather high-profile one, despite the initial assessment, and I've seen my preliminary reports." My stomach tightened further. "I believe there are inconsistencies, sir, evidence that points away from suicide." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I read that. Inconsistencies. Tell me, Omar, are I quite sure I read not? Over-investigating. We are, after all, operating under considerable pressure. The morgue at capacity after mass casualty event demands our full attention. Resources are stretched thin." He gestured vaguely towards the wall, as if the sheer volume of cases needing processing was pressing in on us even here. I understood the subtext. Don't waste time on a closed case when there are real emergencies. "With all due respect, sir," I added, trying to keep my voice even, "a death is a death. And if it's not what it seems, it deserves the same rigor, regardless of the official ruling. The evidence," he interrupted smoothly, "can sometimes be interpreted through the lens of expectation. I've had a challenging few weeks, Omar, long hours, or I certain my judgment isn't being influenced by fatigue." My jaw tightened. He wasn't suggesting I was incompetent, not directly. He was suggesting I was tired, perhaps even a little paranoid. It was a subtle insinuation, a gentle nudge towards self-doubt. What if I'm just seeing ghosts where there are none? The sheer exhaustion of the past few days, the endless parade of anonymous lives passing through this facility, it was taking a toll. But then I remembered the microscopic fibers, the peculiar dermal abrasion, the almost surgical precision of the scene staging. No, my instincts weren't just fatigue, they were facts. "My judgment is sound, sir," I stated, perhaps a little too sharply. "And the evidence speaks for itself. I believe Elias Thorne was murdered." The director simply stared at me for a long moment, then gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Very well. But understand, Omar, if you pursue this, you pursue it with limited resources, and any further anomalies in your findings will be met with considerable scrutiny." It wasn't a threat, not overtly, but it felt like one, a warning shot. He dismissed me with a curt nod. I walked back to my lab, the fluorescent hum suddenly louder, more grating. The conversation replayed in my head. He hadn't forbidden me, but he'd made it clear I was on my own, and under a magnifying glass. The weight of the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event felt like it was pressing down on my shoulders, making my personal crusade feel selfish. even reckless. When I pushed open my lab door, a faint whiff of ozone hung in the air, the kind that lingered after an electrical surge or a specific type of digital device had been active. My gaze swept across the room. Nothing seemed out of place at first. The trays of samples were where I'd left them, my coffee mug half empty. Then my eyes landed on the workstation where I kept the digital files for the Thorne case. Someone had been in my files. I quickly logged in. My system logs confirmed it, an unauthorized access attempt originating from within the facility's network just minutes after I'd left for the director's office. Then I saw it. On the corner of my workbench, nestled amongst a pile of unused Petri dishes, was a small, ornate silver locket. It wasn't mine. It was a replica of one found in Thorne's study, a sentimental item he supposedly kept. I'd carefully bagged and tagged the original, of course, but I'd been working with high-resolution images of it, trying to decipher a tiny, almost invisible engraving. This replica was identical, down to the minute scratch marks, but the engraving on this one was slightly different. A single, almost imperceptible glyph had been added, a stylized X. It wasn't a casual prank, it was a message. The director's warning, the accessed files, and now this locket. It clicked into place with a sickening certainty. My adversary wasn't just a clever killer. They were powerful, connected, and operating from within. They knew what I was looking at, what I was finding. They had access to internal systems, to my lab, perhaps even to my conversations. This wasn't just about solving a murder anymore. This was personal. Someone was watching me, warning me. The stakes had just been raised, from professional curiosity to something far more dangerous. I was no longer just an investigator. I was a target, and the game had definitely changed. I had to assume everything I did, everything I saw, was being observed. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but it also solidified my resolve. I wouldn't back down, not now. The hum of the ventilation system in the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event was a constant, low thrum, a counterpoint to the quiet reverence usually afforded to the departed. But reverence was a luxury we couldn't afford right now. Every available slab was occupied, every cold drawer sealed, and the air was thick with the faint, metallic tang of disinfectant struggling against the inevitable. My usual corner, a sanctuary of precision, was now a small island in a sea of organized chaos, body bags stacked in temporary bays, the rhythmic beep of a life support system from a nearby trauma bay, a stark reminder of the fragile line between my world and theirs. The detective's words from yesterday still echoed, a low, persistent buzz in my ears. "You're on your own." He hadn't needed to say more. I knew what that meant. No official resources, no backup. Just me, the scalpel, and the microscope. But Thorne's case, it had clawed its way under my skin. The inconsistencies were too glaring, too deliberate to ignore, no matter the pressure to close the book. I leaned closer to the eyepiece, the cold metal of the microscope chilling my brow. For days, I'd been chasing ghosts, invisible residues from Thorne's smart home, fragments so minute they might have been dust motes. But they weren't dust, not the kind I find clinging to forgotten shelves. These were structured, almost crystalline, glinting under the focused beam of light. I'd found them embedded in the fibers of Thorne's expensive rug, clinging to the underside of a data cable he'd apparently been working with, and even, disturbingly, on the epidermal ridges of his fingertips, a ghostly imprint that only high-magnification scanning electron microscopy could truly resolve. They were unlike anything I'd catalogued before. Not organic, not metallic, not synthetic polymer. They had a unique refractive index, a specific lattice structure that hinted at advanced material science. I'd run every known database, every obscure academic paper I could get my hands on, cross-referencing crystallography data, spectral analysis, anything that might give me a lead. Each dead end only fueled a quiet frustration that settled deep in my chest. The world outside, with its clamor for answers from the mass casualty event, felt distant, muffled. My world was this tiny, illuminated circle, this baffling, silent particulate. Then a flicker. A late-night research paper, buried in an archive of experimental bioengineering patents, popped up on my secondary monitor. The abstract was dense, impenetrable without context, But one image, a micrograph, caught my eye. The same geometric pattern, the same subtle, iridescent sheen. It was listed as a nanocrystalline substrate for advanced biocomputational interfacing. My breath hitched. Biocomputational interfacing. Thorne, the reclusive tech mogul. It clicked, not like a sudden revelation, but like a slow, deliberate tumblers falling into place. I pulled up Thorne's public profile, then dug deeper into his corporate filings, his foundation's grants, the whispers from the tech blogs. He wasn't just a software genius. His later years had been spent in absolute secrecy, funding projects so niche, so cutting-edge, they barely registered on the mainstream radar. One project in particular kept resurfacing in fragmented reports, always under different code names: Project Chimera, the Sentient Grid, Nexus, the nanocrystalline substrate. It wasn't just a material. It was a component, a building block for something far more complex. The paper described its potential: a medium capable of seamlessly integrating biological neural pathways with artificial intelligence. Not just a computer that mimicked thought, but a system that learned and evolved in a truly organic, yet digitally accelerated way. A synthetic consciousness, perhaps. This wasn't just about faster processors or better algorithms. This was about redefining what it meant to be alive, to think, to exist. The implications were enormous. Imagine a system that could predict market fluctuations with perfect accuracy by processing billions of human psychological profiles in real time. Or a weapon that could infiltrate and incapacitate an enemy's command structure not by hacking their systems, but by subtly altering their very perception of reality. Or, for the truly ambitious, a path to digital immortality, an escape from the biological constraints of the body. The value. It wasn't just financial. It was beyond that. Whoever controlled Project Nexus wouldn't just be rich, they'd hold unprecedented power. The ability to reshape economies, dictate political outcomes, even influence the very fabric of human experience. It was the ultimate prize, the kind of innovation that could destabilize global power structures overnight. Thorne hadn't been working on a new app or a better smart home system. He'd been building a new paradigm, a technology so profoundly transformative that its existence alone would be enough to spark wars, topple governments, and ignite a frantic, desperate race for control. And someone had clearly decided Thorne himself was an obstacle to that control. The meticulous planning, the technological sophistication of the crime scene, the carefully orchestrated misdirection of the overdose, it all made terrifying sense now. The trace evidence on Thorne's fingers, almost invisible dust on the data cable. He hadn't just been working on the project, he'd been handling it, perhaps even trying to hide or destroy parts of it. And someone had been watching. Someone who understood the science, understood the stakes, and was willing to commit the perfect murder to claim their prize. My initial assessment of the scene, the faint alarm bells that had rung about the suicide, now screamed a warning. This wasn't a desperate man taking his own life. This was a man eliminated, strategically, precisely, to clear the path for a project of unimaginable scope. And I, Omar, standing amidst the grim reality of a morgue at capacity after mass casualty event, had just stumbled into the epicenter of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond Elias Thorne's impenetrable smart home. I wasn't just investigating a death anymore. I was uncovering the motive behind a murder that could change the world. The air in the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event hung thick and heavy, a metallic tang mingling with the sterile bite of disinfectants. Every gurney was occupied, every surface piled with grim, tagged evidence. I moved through the controlled chaos like a ghost, my focus a narrow beam in the maelstrom of activity. The constant murmur of voices, the clatter of instruments, the quiet, summer movements of the other workers. It all faded into a dull thrum beneath the urgency of my thoughts. My mind was still wrestling with the nanocrystalline substrate. It wasn't just a material, I'd realized. It was a component. The paper I'd found described its potential, a medium capable of seamlessly integrating biological neural pathways with artificial intelligence. Not just a computer that mimicked human thought, but one that could potentially become a part of it. Thorne wasn't just dabbling in advanced tech. He was on the cusp of a revolution, or perhaps a terrifying new frontier, and someone had killed him to stop it or to seize it. Omar, the detective's voice cut through my concentration. He stood by a stainless steel table, a tablet clutched in one hand, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes sharp. I think we've got something. Cross-referenced the digital footprint you gave us, the unusual data packets, the specific encryption protocols with Thorne's inner circle. I pushed a stray strand of hair back from my forehead, my gaze fixed on the detective's face. And it points to a very specific set of skills. Someone who could not only understand Thorne's network architecture, but also exploit its vulnerabilities. Someone who could mimic his digital ghost, as you called it, to perfection. Paused, letting the implications sink in. More than that, someone who knew about the specific research you've been chasing, the nanocrystalline substrate. My internal gears began to grind, connecting the dots. So not just a hacker, not just a corporate spy looking for blueprints, someone intimately familiar with the science behind it. Exactly, the detective affirmed, nodding slowly. We've been digging into Thorne's past collaborations, his former proteges, anyone who had a deep dive into the Project Chimera files. That's what they called the AI integration research. Most of it was highly classified, even within Thorne's own company. Only a handful of individuals had full access, and even fewer understood the full scope of what he was trying to achieve. He swiped on his tablet, bringing up a profile. There's one name that keeps coming up, Omar, someone who worked very closely with Thorne on the initial phases of Project Chimera, a lead researcher instrumental in developing the early prototypes of the neural interface. Name's Omar. I felt a jolt. My name. The detective gave a wry smile. No, not you, Omar. Another one, a different Omar. Omar K. He corrected himself quickly, realizing my momentary confusion. Let's call him the lead researcher. He left Thorne's company abruptly about 3 years ago, under a cloud of intellectual property disputes. Claimed Thorne stole his core concepts for the neural integration. Thorne, of course, denied it, citing non-disclosure agreements and company ownership. My mind raced. A disgruntled insider. Someone with motive, access, and the technical prowess to not only bypass Thorne's legendary security, but to weaponize his own technology against him. I tapped my finger on the cold steel table. The self-administering sedative, the precise dosage, the way Thorne's home systems were manipulated to look like a suicide. It all screams of someone who knew the intimate details of Thorne's life, his habits, even his physiological responses. That's not all. The detective continued, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper amidst the surrounding din. Our digital forensics team found a series of encrypted communications originating from a remote server farm in a decommissioned warehouse. The pattern of data transmission, the specific type of quantum entanglement encryption used, it matches the digital signature we found embedded in the corrupted smart home logs. And who is tied to that server farm? I wondered, my voice tight with anticipation. He brought up another screen on his tablet. The lead researcher. He established it shortly after leaving Thorne's company. He's been operating a rogue AI development lab out of there, completely off the grid. The phrase echoed in my mind. Integrating biological neural pathways with artificial intelligence. What if the lead researcher wasn't just looking to build a better AI, but to control minds, to exploit the very fabric of human consciousness? Why eliminate Thorne only recently? That's the missing piece, the detective admitted, running a hand over his tired face. Our corporate intelligence suggests Thorne was about to unveil a major breakthrough, something that would have leapfrogged anything currently in development, including the lead researcher's own projects. A final, definitive version of the Project Chimera interface. He was planning a private demonstration for a select group of investors next week. He was about to win, I finished, the puzzle pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. The lead researcher couldn't let that happen. He needed Thorne out of the way, and perhaps he needed access to Thorne's final iteration of the technology. I remembered the subtle tremor in Thorne's hand, the minute inconsistencies in his gait, the almost imperceptible changes in his eye movements I'd observed in the holographic recordings. I dismissed them as signs of a man under pressure, or perhaps early onset neurological issues. But what if they were something else entirely? What if Thorne was already being subtly manipulated, tested by the lead researcher's prototype long before the fatal dose? A sudden flicker of doubt pierced my certainty. Could it really be this straightforward? A disgruntled genius, a stolen idea, a final act of desperate sabotage. Thorne was a master of misdirection, a fortress of secrets. What if this was too neat, too obvious? My eyes scanned the sterile environment, the rows of covered forms, the constant reminder of humanity's fragility. Was I letting the pressure of this place, this case, make me jump to conclusions? No, the evidence was too specific. The nanocrystalline substrate, the digital signature, the precise method of murder, it all coalesced around one individual. We need to move on the lead researcher, I stated, the determination hardening in my voice, pushing away the fleeting doubt. Now, before he can erase any more tracks or worse, use what he's taken. The detective nodded, already turning to make the necessary calls. The air in the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event still hummed with tragic activity, but for the first time I felt a focused purpose. We had a name, we had a target, and the hunt had just truly begun. The air in the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event still hummed with a low, mournful drone, a symphony of silenced lives. But for me, the focus had sharpened, the background noise fading into an irrelevant hum. The detective, a man of few wasted movements, had finished his calls. He confirmed it. Our target, the architect of Elias Thorne's meticulously crafted demise, had been located. They've got her cornered, the detective stated, his voice flat, devoid of triumph. A private residence across the city. Doesn't seem to have anticipated this. Didn't run. Too confident, I mused, pulling off my gloves, the sterile scent clinging to my skin. Or too arrogant to think she'd be caught. Either way, he nodded, already heading for the exit. Your stage, pathologist. Time to show her how. The drive felt oddly short, the city lights blurring past the reinforced windows of the unmarked vehicle. My mind raced, replaying every observation, every microscopic detail, every intuition I'd had since stepping into Elias Thorne's sterile, technologically advanced mausoleum. The initial police assessment of suicide had felt like a slap in the face. It was too neat, too convenient, and utterly contradicted by the subtle whispers of the body and the scene. A handful of uniformed officers secured the perimeter, their presence almost invisible against the backdrop of the quiet street. Inside, in a sparsely furnished living room, sat a woman. He was elegant, composed, with sharp, intelligent eyes that betrayed no fear, only a calculating curiosity. I recognized her from the few publicly available photos of Thorne's corporate inner circle, his head of R&D, a brilliant but notoriously private innovator. Let's call her the chief engineer. She sat opposite the detective, a table between them. She hadn't been cuffed, a testament to her apparent calm. When I walked in, she merely tilted her head, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. He thought he was untouchable. Omar Al-Hamid, I introduced myself, my voice calm, even despite the knot of anticipation tightening in my gut. Forensic pathologist. I examined Elias Thorne. I know who you are, she replied, her voice smooth, cultured. And I know what you do. A fascinating field, the study of death. But I assure you, Dr. Al-Hamid, there's nothing to discuss. Elias took his own life. A tragedy, yes, but not a mystery. That's where you're mistaken, I countered, pulling a slim tablet from my bag. The detective gestured for me to take the lead. You crafted a masterpiece, I'll give you that. You understood Elias Thorne's habits, his home, his trust in technology. And crucially, you understood the limitations of a standard forensic examination. I brought up the first image, a close-up of Thorne's hand. Initial reports cited an overdose of a common sedative, administered orally, but look closer. The trace residue on the tongue and throat, while present, wasn't consistent with the volume necessary to induce such a rapid, profound effect. It was too clean. The chief engineer's eyes narrowed fractionally. He was meticulous. Perhaps he rinsed. Perhaps, I conceded, moving to the next slide. But then there's the micro-abrasion on the soft palate. Almost imperceptible, the kind you'd only find if you were specifically looking for it under high magnification after rehydration of the tissue. Not a sign of struggle, but a signature. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, then not fear, but a sudden realization that I hadn't just looked, I had seen. And the drug itself, I continued, leaning slightly over the table, my gaze unwavering. Yes, a common sedative, but the specific isomer, the molecular chirality, was subtly altered, a synthetic variant designed for rapid absorption directly into the bloodstream through a highly vascularized mucosal surface, bypassing the slower digestive tract entirely. A mist, perhaps, or a fine aerosol delivered directly to the back of the throat, disguised as a routine air purification cycle in his smart home. Her composure began to crack, just barely. A muscle twitched in her jaw. Pure speculation. There's no proof of such a delivery system. Oh, but there is, I answered, displaying a schematic of Thorne's bedroom. You exploited his bespoke environmental control system. A small, almost invisible modification to the bedroom's air vent, designed to release a localized, targeted plume. It wouldn't trigger any standard alarms, as it was integrated into the system's own diagnostic profile. The compound itself was designed to degrade rapidly, leaving only the common sedative behind as a red herring. The specific trace compound, a unique metallic salt, a catalyst used in the synthesis of my specific chiral isomer. It doesn't degrade, it lingers, and I found it. Not on the body, not in the air, but in the microfilter of the very vent system you modified. A signature, as I said, a unique fingerprint. She stared at the image of the microfilter on my tablet, her face a mask of carefully controlled fury. A speck of dust. You're building a fantasy on a speck of dust. A speck of dust that contains a compound found nowhere else in the house, I corrected, and one that matches the byproducts of a specific, patented synthesis process. My process, from a research project you led 2 years ago, quietly shelved due to its unforeseen side effects, namely, its rapid, potent sedative properties. The detective, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. We also have the data logs from Thorne's smart home. A brief, anomalous spike in energy consumption in his bedroom HVAC system precisely at the time of death. Too short to be a full cycle, too intense to be a glitch. Perfectly consistent with a targeted high-pressure aerosol release. The chief engineer's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. My true genius. He called it ethically questionable. He was going to shut it down, destroy everything I'd worked for. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine. There was a flash of something akin to pride, even in defeat. I designed a compound that could subtly influence behavior, guide decisions, even induce a state of profound suggestibility without leaving a trace. Thorne saw it as a violation. I saw it as the future. He had to be removed before he could undo years of my life's work. I knew he wouldn't suspect his own air quality system. A moment of doubt flickered. Had I truly seen every angle? Had she accounted for something else? But the evidence, the physical, undeniable evidence was there. The microabrasion, the chiral isomer, the specific catalyst, the energy spike, it all wove into an irrefutable tapestry. You didn't just kill Elias Thorne, I stated, my voice low. You tried to make him a ghost, a cautionary tale of suicide. But bodies, even technologically advanced ones, always tell their secrets. You just have to know how to listen. She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on some distant point, already planning her next move perhaps, even in the face of inevitable capture. The detective moved forward, his hand resting on her shoulder. Time to go. The clink of handcuffs was a stark punctuation mark to the quiet confession. The hunt was over. The truth, ugly and complex, had finally surfaced. The clink of handcuffs had been the end of one chapter, but I knew even then it wasn't the end of the book. The colleague, her face a mask of bitter resignation, had given up the physical fight, but the air still hummed with unspoken secrets. I watched the detective lead her away, a hollow victory settling in my chest. A killer was off the streets, yes, but the why still felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its border pieces. My phone buzzed, pulling me from the quiet satisfaction. Another case, urgent, demanding. The city was reeling from a different kind of tragedy, a multi-vehicle pileup on the main highway, exacerbated by a freak storm. I was needed. My brief moment of reflection on Thorne's intricate demise was swallowed by the immediate, brutal reality of widespread death. I found myself at the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event, a place that usually hummed with a sterile, methodical cadence, now a maelstrom of controlled chaos. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of disinfectant, unable to quite conquer the pervasive odor of mortality. Every gurney was occupied, every surface piled with evidence bags, personal effects, and the grim paperwork that accompanied such an event. The usual quiet efficiency was replaced by a somber, relentless pace. My own table, usually a solitary island, was squeezed between two others, each bearing its own silent testament to the highway's sudden violence. I worked through the night, my hands moving with practiced precision, cataloging injuries, identifying causes, my mind a quiet hum of analysis even as the world around me screamed. It was during a brief lull, as the sun began to paint the sky in bruised purples and oranges through the high windows, that my thoughts drifted back to Elias Thorne. His death, so precise, so controlled, felt like a stark counterpoint to the random, indiscriminate horror surrounding me. I pulled out my tablet, sifting through the digital files on the Thorne case, a small, selfish act amidst the overwhelming demands of the present. The colleague's confession had been limited to her actions, her motive framed as personal ambition, a desire to control Thorne's Ethernet project for her own gain. But something about it gnawed at me. The sheer sophistication of the murder, the calculated misdirection, the way he had leveraged Thorne's own technology against him, it felt too grand for mere personal ambition. Too many moving parts. I scrolled through the project schematics again, the complex algorithms, the network architecture. Ethernet wasn't just a smart home system. It was a distributed, self-healing network designed to operate completely off-grid, capable of routing data and commands through seemingly innocuous smart devices worldwide. Thorne had envisioned it as a secure communication channel for disaster relief, a way to rebuild infrastructure in a crisis. A noble goal on paper. But then I saw it, buried deep within a subsection of the network's control protocols, a series of subroutines labeled Ghost Key. My brow furrowed. I hadn't given it much thought before, assuming it was some kind of failsafe or a unique encryption method. But now, looking at the code in the context of a broader conspiracy, it clicked. This wasn't just encryption. It was a backdoor, a master key capable of overriding all security, granting silent, untraceable access to any device connected to Ethernet anywhere in the world. And not just access, but control. My breath hitched. This wasn't about stealing data. This was about power. Unprecedented, undetectable power. Imagine a network that could subtly reroute financial transactions, manipulate utility grids, or even influence electoral systems, all while appearing to be a benign smart home ecosystem. Thorne, I realized, would never have designed such a thing to be exploited. He was an idealist, for all his reclusiveness. He must have built the Ghost Key as a last resort, a kill switch for the entire network, or perhaps a diagnostic tool. But the colleague, he had clearly repurposed it. A cold dread settled in my stomach, pushing aside the fatigue. The colleague wasn't just selling access to Thorne's project, he was selling the keys to the kingdom. He hadn't just been a rival, he was the only one who truly understood the full implications of the Ghost Key, the only one who could have stopped its misuse. His death wasn't just about silencing him, it was about gaining unfettered control. Wait, I muttered to myself, pushing back from the table, nearly knocking over a tray of sterile instruments. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The subtle changes in Thorne's behavior before his death, the increasing paranoia the estate manager had mentioned. Thorne wasn't just reclusive, he was scared. He must have discovered what the colleague was doing. I pulled up the logs from Thorne's personal server, cross-referencing them with the colleague's known activity. There, in the days leading up to Thorne's death, were a series of encrypted communications, IP addresses masked. routed through multiple proxies. Not with individuals, but with corporate shells, shell companies linked to larger, multinational conglomerates known for aggressive, often ethically dubious, acquisition strategies. This wasn't about one person's greed. It was about corporate espionage on a global scale, a silent war for control of the digital future. My initial thought that the colleague was the mastermind felt naive now. He was a crucial piece, yes, the operational mind, but he was just a conduit, a highly skilled mercenary. Thorne's murder was merely the opening gambit in a much larger, far more dangerous game. I looked around the morgue, at the quiet, solemn rows of humanity, each a victim of a random, cruel twist of fate. And then I thought of Thorne, a victim of a meticulously planned, utterly ruthless conspiracy. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. I wasn't just solving a murder anymore. I was staring down the barrel of something that could redefine the very concept of power, and I had a feeling this was only the beginning of unraveling their network. The hunt for the killer might be over, but the hunt for the truth had just begun. And the truth, I suspected, was far more terrifying than a single, isolated act of violence. The air in the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the metallic tang of blood, the sharp bite of disinfectant, and the cloying sweetness of decomposition. Every ventilation system whirred frantically, fighting a losing battle against the sheer volume of humanity that had, in an instant, become mere statistics. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, the fluorescent lights above casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on the stainless steel surfaces that now seemed to stretch endlessly. I moved through the narrow aisles between gurneys, each one bearing a silent testament to a life abruptly ended, a grim reminder of the fragile boundary between existence and oblivion. The sheer scale of it was numbing, yet the details, the specific injuries, the individual stories whispered by the bodies, still clawed at the edges of my focus. A stack of preliminary reports for the other cases sat precariously on my cramped desk, threatening to topple with every passing colleague. I had barely slept in days, caught between the immediate, overwhelming demands of the mass casualty event and the lingering tendrils of the Elias Thorne case. Just as I was about to dive into another set of charts, the office phone buzzed with an insistent urgency that cut through the general hum of the facility. It was the prosecutor's office. "Omar, they've set a preliminary hearing. Your testimony is crucial." The prosecutor's aide rattled off, their voice tight with professional efficiency. "Expect a subpoena by end of day. The defense is already trying to discredit the digital evidence." The legal process had begun, just like that. A cold knot formed in my stomach, not from fear, but from the realization that the meticulous, painstaking work of science was about to be dragged into the messy, often subjective arena of law. My mind, already fatigued, recoiled from the thought of reducing the intricate tapestry of Thorne's murder into digestible sound bites, stripped of nuance and context. I hung up, the receiver feeling heavy in my hand, and leaned back in my chair, the plastic groaning in protest. The image of the colleague, her face a mask of bitter resignation as the detective led her away, flashed in my mind. Now, it felt like the beginning of a different kind of war. It wasn't just about a body in a smart home. It was about the insidious creep of technology into the very fabric of our lives, blurring the lines between reality and manipulation. The killer hadn't used a crude weapon. They had weaponized information, algorithms, and the digital ghost of a man's life. They understood the science of deception, the art of misdirection, all wrapped in a veneer of technological sophistication that was almost beautiful in its depravity. I remembered the initial police assessment, the easy dismissal of suicide. If I hadn't pushed, if I hadn't trusted my gut instinct that something was off asterisk about the tiny, almost imperceptible details, the angle of the head, the residue on the skin that didn't quite match the narrative, it would have been closed. Another statistic. It gnawed at me, the thought of how easily justice could be derailed by a convincing digital lie. My unwavering pursuit of scientific fact had been vindicated, yes, but the cost felt heavy. There were moments, late at night, poring over digital forensic reports that seemed to contradict my physical findings, when a flicker of doubt would spark. Had I truly seen what I thought I saw? There was my own interpretation, tainted by my desire to find a deeper truth. The colleague was brilliant, after all, masterful in her craft. Had she somehow outsmarted me, planted a seed of doubt that would bloom into a fatal flaw in my argument? But the seed had been planted, however briefly. The emotional toll of the investigation was profound. It made me question the ethics of innovation, the moral compass of those who wield cutting-edge technology without a thought for its potential for harm. Elias Thorne had built an empire on connectivity, and in the end, it was that very connectivity that facilitated his undoing, turned against him by someone who knew how to exploit its vulnerabilities. The nature of truth in a world increasingly shaped by digital deception felt like a constantly shifting mirage. How do you prove intent when the actions are mediated by layers of code and virtual proxies? My job, traditionally, was about the tangible, tissue, bone, fluid. This case had dragged me into the intangible, forcing me to learn a new language, to understand the forensics of the digital realm as intimately as I understood the human body. The low hum of the morgue's cooling units was a constant reminder of mortality, a bass note beneath the symphony of life and death that played out here daily. The mass casualty event underscored the fragility of existence, but Thorne's case highlighted a different kind of vulnerability, the fragility of truth itself when confronted by cunning and advanced technology. I walked to the observation window overlooking the main examination floor. Below, a team of forensic assistants moved with practiced efficiency, their faces grim, their movements precise. Each body was a puzzle, a story waiting to be told. The Thorne case was another puzzle, a particularly intricate one, but its resolution wouldn't bring Elias Thorne back. It would, however, define the boundaries of justice in a new, increasingly complex digital age. I had found the truth, yes, but the fight to make that truth stand in court against a formidable opponent was just beginning. The scent was different here, not the sterile tang of disinfectant mixed with the metallic whisper of life's final moments, but the clean, almost electric hum of servers and the faint aroma of fresh coffee. My new workspace, bathed in the cool, blue glow of multiple monitors, felt less like a lab and more like a command center. Weeks, maybe months, had blurred since Elias Thorne's meticulously crafted demise had been laid bare in court. The legal process had been an arduous affair, just as I'd predicted, a messy tangle of human interpretation grappling with irrefutable scientific fact. My testimony, precise and unyielding, had been the anchor in a storm of legal maneuvering. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had prevailed, but the victory felt incomplete, a hollow echo. I remembered standing in the hushed, overwhelming chaos of the morgue at capacity after mass casualty event. The sheer scale of it had been devastating, rows upon rows of trauma and loss, each requiring its own painstaking examination. My hands, usually so steady, had trembled with a profound exhaustion, not just physical, but existential. The faces of the victims, the stories etched onto their bodies, had been a brutal reminder of humanity's fragility. But beyond the immediate tragedy, my mind had been racing, connecting the dots back to Thorne. How many of these victims, I'd wondered, might have had digital footprints that could have offered warnings? How many could have been saved if we understood the invisible currents of the digital world as intimately as we understood the currents of blood and bone? That day, amidst the overwhelming sorrow, a new kind of resolve had solidified within me. The meticulous, painstaking work of science wasn't just about the past anymore. It had to be about the future. It had to evolve. So here I was, not dissecting bodies, but dissecting data streams. My screen displayed a complex network graph, lines of connection branching out like neural pathways. This wasn't a murder case, not in the traditional sense, but a study in digital vulnerabilities, a preemptive strike against the next Thorne, the next killer who would weaponize code instead of a knife. A colleague, a bright young analyst whose mind moved at the speed of light, leaned over my shoulder. "Omar, look at this anomaly in the encryption handshake. He pointed, his finger hovering over a cluster of green nodes. It's subtle, almost imperceptible unless I were looking for it. Exactly, I murmured, a flicker of satisfaction, a familiar knot of tension tightening in my gut. This was the new battlefield. The subtle, the almost imperceptible, the kind of detail that Elias Thorne had used to craft his perfect crime. He'd understood that the most effective lies are often woven into the fabric of truth, just a thread out of place. My role now was less about post-mortem examination and more about proactive forensic architecture. I was an advocate, yes, but more importantly, a researcher, pushing the boundaries of what forensic science could be in this hyper-connected age. I lectured to new recruits, not just on the nuances of tissue decomposition, but on the digital decay of data, the ephemeral trails left by ghosts in the machine. I collaborated with engineers, ethicists, and legal counsel, all grappling with the uncharted territory of cybercrime and its implications for justice. The challenges were immense. For every vulnerability we identified, a new one seemed to emerge. For every digital fingerprint we learned to trace, a new method of obfuscation was developed. I found myself often staring out the window of this new lab, not at the usual city sprawl, but at the shifting patterns of cloud cover. It was a different kind of observation, less grounded, more expansive. The weight of it all, the endless horizon of new threats pressed down on me. There was no comfortable plateau, no final victory. Only continuous vigilance, continuous learning. The chief administrator, a pragmatic woman with a keen eye for budgets and an even keener one for talent, had pulled me aside a few weeks ago. "Omar," he'd said, "I've changed the way we think about modern crime, but this isn't a sprint. It's a marathon against an opponent who never sleeps." He was right. The jadedness hadn't completely vanished. It had simply reshaped itself into a focused determination. But now I felt equipped with new tools, new perspectives. The digital frontier stretched out before me, an endless landscape of new challenges, new mysteries waiting to be unraveled, one subtle, almost imperceptible anomaly at a time. And I, Omar Al-Hamid, was ready to meet them.